Hello everyone, I am Helen Lavery. I am a partner at Zero Waste Scotland and I work across the Highlands and Islands and wider rural Scotland supporting the development of a circular economy. A bit of background to Zero Waste Scotland before we kick off with the panel. We are funded by the Scottish Government and we exist to lead Scotland to use products and resources responsibly. And we focus our work on where we can have the biggest impact on climate change. 4/5 or 80% of Scotland's carbon footprint is generated by the vast amounts of goods and materials which we produce, we consume, and we throw away. And we often throw away these things after just one use. This is the single greatest cause of the climate crisis, and it's an issue that we all need to address. And this challenge forms the basis of Zero Waste Scotland's work, designing out waste and adding value to all of our resources. Given our focus, we are delighted to be hosting today's session on the topic of net zero. So welcome to those of you who are joining your first Highlands and Islands Regional Food Groups Conference panel session, and welcome back to those of you who joined our earlier sessions looking at attracting and retaining staff, funding and collaboration. This 55-minute panel is running in parallel with today's food and drink tourism session. So if you're in the wrong place, there's just time to swap sessions online and we won't be offended if you want to quickly jump into another session. As a reminder, all of today's conference content is being filmed and it will be uploaded on HIE's YouTube channel soon, so you can catch up on the sessions that you've missed. We'll also be emailing out a conference delegate pack in about a week's time containing speaker slides, website links and other resources mentioned throughout the course of the conference. So please sit back and relax and enjoy this live session. Today is all about engagement, networking and asking questions. So on that point, our three net zero panel speakers are about to give presentations lasting around 10 minutes each. And we will then open up the digital floor to your questions. So please note down any comments and queries as you listen and watch and pop them into social chat and I'll pose them to the panelists just after 12:30. So I'm delighted to welcome to our screens David Thomson of Food and Drink Federation Scotland, David Chapman of Aquascot and Amy Stammers of Nc'nean Distillery. Afternoon all. Our first speaker this afternoon is David Thomson. So I will hand over to you, David, for the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Helen. And it's a real pleasure to be here and to talk about net zero. I hope lots of people have stayed and actually moved over from the other session to make sure they're here to talk about net zero. Who am I? I'm David Thomson. I'm the Chief Executive of the Food and Drink Federation Scotland. We are a trade association of food and drink manufacturers. From Baxter's to McSween's and from Tunnocks to Dean's, we represent lots of people across the breadth of Scotland. I'm also privileged to be part of the Scotland Food and Drink Partnership, which is an association of trade associations, Scottish Government and other public bodies, which supports and develops the industry strategy for Scotland, which is currently called Ambition 2030. And as part of that, we've decided to work together on a net zero commitment, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about that today. If we could have the next slide, please, Paul. So, what is net zero? Let's start with that. Well, net zero, as we look at it, is that your production and operations are net zero in carbon use. This means that cutting as much carbon as possible in your production and supply chain is an important part of what you can do. And when you've done all that, compensating for the rest is what you can also do to support that work. So why do you need to think about this as a food and drink producer? Well, firstly, obviously, it's the right thing to do. You just need to turn on the news to know that this is an important part of the battle against climate change, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. Secondly, as a business, it's likely to save you money. A lot of this is around cuts in waste and energy usage. So how can you really drive down those costs for your business? We also know, and it's getting stronger and clearer, that consumers want to understand how your company is working towards net zero. We know if you supply, for example, a supermarket, that customers there are demanding it, and they will demand it. So the supermarkets themselves have said by 2040 that they will want to be net zero themselves. So that means all the products they sell will need to be there. Your own team is going to want to know about this, and this is a huge part of team engagement, I think, in the future of food and drink production in this country. If you have investors, they're likely to support this kind of work, and it's coming higher and higher on the investment agenda. And lastly, the hammer, governments will make you do it. The Scottish Government has been very clear about its net zero commitment, and legislation has been brought in place to make sure that the country can drive towards that by 2045. So there's lots of reasons why this is important. If I could have the next slide, please, Paul. So the Scotland Food and Drink Partnership took advantage of COP26 last year as a real opportunity to focus on what we would do as a collective to support the drive towards net zero in Scotland. And we came out with this set of commitments, which are very, very clear and simple, we hope. The first is that we'll put net zero at the heart of our sector strategy. So I mentioned our sector strategy for the food and drink sector, Ambition 2030. Over the course of this year, that will be revised, and net zero is going to be a key component of that work in a way that environment and sustainability has always been a pillar, but this will be a real focus of the work that we do. Secondly, we know across the whole of the country, and in particular across the vast majority of small and medium-sized enterprises that are in Scotland's food and drink industry, that this is not going to be easy. It's very difficult for individual businesses to grapple with, to know the right things to do, and have the time and resource to be able to do that. So we will be supporting a whole suite of different levels of support and aid for businesses, as well as talking to government about what more they can do to support food and drink businesses on the net zero journey. Thirdly, we know that the strength of the Scotland Food and Drink Partnership is collaboration, one of the themes of this conference. We worked together very successfully for 15 years, and really those 15 years have seen a massive sea change in the attitude towards food and drink in this country. And this conference is just one part of all that work. So working together, we know that we have shared challenges, but working together, we also know that we can tackle those challenges. And really, the point of the partnership is to make sure that we prioritise tackling challenges that are shared. We also know that it's quite difficult to know what to do. Data around all of this is difficult, especially if you're a small and medium-sized enterprise. So both the policy decisions that we'll be making and actually the individual decisions that businesses should be making will be based on data, and we'll work very hard to make sure that's easily accessible and understandable for businesses. And I'm sure we'll see in the case studies that follow some of the ways that that data is currently used in the businesses that have done this work already. And then lastly is making the transition to net zero a just one. That sounds like jargon, but it's not really. What it really means is that people in the industry get the right skills, green skills, skills for the future that allow them to really tackle this agenda with confidence. And secondly, we want to make sure that no business is left behind in this. And that's why we're working to put in place support, testing out what works with different pilots, and working on innovation to make sure that as many businesses as possible can take advantage of the support that's available. So there are lots and lots of areas of work that we're going to be driving forward. The Scotland Food and Drink Partnership has put an investment in, and there will be a net zero team supporting the work of that partnership across the whole board, and that will be available to any business in Scotland who wants to use that support. So there's lots of excitement to come, I think. But what if you want to do it now? If I could have the next slide, please, Paul. So there is support and advice already. So on the Scotland Food and Drink website, there's a very comprehensive resource to greening your business that was done in conjunction with Zero Waste Scotland. And that's an excellent source of very practical advice that will help you take some of the first steps there. For a more comprehensive look at what net zero looks like, my own organisation, Food and Drink Federation, has a freely available, very detailed net zero handbook. And again, if you want to have a look at all the areas that companies should be thinking about, then that's a fantastic place to have a look and use. And as I said, with the investment that Scotland Food and Drink and the Scottish Government have put into net zero for the food and drink industry, there will be a lot more to come over the coming years as this agenda develops, as legislation develops, as consumer demand develops, and as technology develops. So the main message to take away from this is twofold, I think. Firstly, net zero matters. It's something that you and a business have to think about and have to grapple with. And then the second is, and don't worry, there's lots of support, advice, and a strong strategic thrust available to help you with much more to come. So if you can move to the next slide, please, Paul. If I could get the next slide, please, Paul, sorry. So the key thing here is that we're looking for as many partners as possible, for businesses to get engaged, to share where the challenges are, to share their solutions, and to share that the work that they can do and how we can help them across the whole of the Scotland Food and Drink Partnership. There was this last slide with my contact details, but that's okay. They're all available on the Socio app. If you've got anything that you want to feedback or talk to us about, we'd be really interested, because there's a huge agenda here that we're all trying to grapple with. That's me, Helen. I will pass back over to you.
Thank you. It was a really interesting scene setter, and I think it really enforces the bigger net zero picture for Scotland. If what David said got you thinking, please message us your questions or comments in the social chat, and I'll pose them to the whole panel when all the presentations are complete. We are also running an online audience poll in the social app throughout the conference to gather your views on the topics that we're discussing, and you can vote before 12:50 on whether net zero adds value to your business or is it a threat. And I'll announce the delegate poll results at 12:55, just before the 5-minute conference conclusion session. Next up is a speaker from a sizable Highland seafood company that's already well along their own path to net zero. So I will hand over to David Chapman for his 10-minute presentation.
Thanks, Helen. I'll just attempt to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that now. Someone could give me a thumbs up. That would be great. Yeah, thanks, Helen. My name is David Chapman. I'm the head of procurement for a company called Aquascot. We're a salmon and trout processor based in Nc'nean in the Highlands of Scotland. I'm delighted to be invited along here to just give a little bit of a flavour of where we are in our journey towards net zero, and just give you a little bit of an overview of the journey so far, I guess, and all the work that we've still got ahead of us as we get towards net zero or better by 2030. Really briefly, just who we are and what we do. As I said, we're a salmon and trout processor based in Nc'nean. We were established around about 35 years ago. We are an employee-owned business, so the business is our business. We started the journey towards employee ownership in 2008, and we became 100% employee-owned at the end of 2016. So it was a fair journey. The employee ownership model is based on the John Lewis partnership model, because, as it says there, we started trading with Waitrose around about 30 years ago in 1993. And then we became a dedicated supplier to Waitrose around about 10 years later. So we're coming up to 20 years as being a dedicated supplier to Waitrose. So that means that they are our only customer, but with that comes a huge responsibility in terms of being that customer, being that supplier, sorry, and managing that entire supply chain for them. We're a fairly sizable business, as Helen said. We've got 190 partners, so we don't have employees that work for us. We are all partners, and our turnover's round about £69 million a year. So we're fairly sizable. However, still quite a small team, and still quite a small business mentality. We are extremely value driven, and you'll see there in the dark blue some of our values that we adhere to. And that one there is naturally kind in particular, kind to the environment, kind to the community that we operate in. And that's really important to our partners and especially to our customer. So 2030, and why are we embarking on this journey towards net zero? I guess the number one reason is David gave us some of the reasons there, and these are real for us. Our customer is demanding it of us. So Waitrose, a retailer that is embedded in its ethics and sustainability, they launched this agricultural strategy at the back end of 2020. And you can see some of the things in there around making greenhouse gas emissions from their farms, whether that's agriculture or aquaculture, net zero by 2035, minimizing food waste, and making sure that everything that they source is ethically farmed or fished. So we have an expectation on us that we need to adhere to that. Why 2030? I'll be totally honest. They said 2035, so we thought we can do better than that. Let's knock 5 years off it and let's go for net zero by 2030. Our partners, they expect that of us as a business, as a senior leadership team, as a board. It's the right thing to do. As I said, naturally kind is one of our core values. So we have an expectation from those that work in our business that we do the right thing. And that for us is extremely important. No doubt about it. We are looking at cost reduction. We are looking at avoidance this year of things like the plastic tax, trying to minimise our packaging obligations for some of the plastics that we use. We are seeing, as all businesses are, a huge increase in costs, whether it's utilities or raw materials. So we are trying to minimise the use of materials, avoid and reduce costs where possible. So that undoubtedly that is a big driver. Attract new customers. Waitrose are our only customer at the moment, but as we look for new opportunities and new markets, our environmental and sustainability credentials will absolutely be key in attracting new customers. And recruiting new talent. We had Kickstart graduates, we had Saltire Foundation fellows last year, and when we talked to kind of younger people, that those talent that we're trying to attract into our business, a company's environmental and sustainability credentials and their views are extremely important. It's a real decision maker for people deciding who they want to work for in the future. We're under no illusions, we are a food processor. We are in buildings that are coming up to 30 years old now. It's going to be extremely difficult to make those environmentally friendly, whatever technology we tried retrofit. So we've got 2 sites about a mile apart, covering about 5,000 square meters. So it's going to be difficult. We understand that, and we're just at the start of the journey towards that net zero. I guess the launch of the Waitrose agricultural strategy at the back end of 2020, we had a real kind of watershed moment in 2021 and really changed the way that we approached our view of net zero. We were doing a lot of good things, there's no doubt about that. We had a lot of projects and initiatives within Aquascot. We were conscious of our environmental footprint, but it was really siloed. We were working as individuals, or we were working in individual departments. We didn't have a common focus on it. So last year, we created a dedicated environmental and sustainability group. And you can see there that the work streams and the work groups that come out of that, focusing on particular areas: plastics and recycling, our use of resources, energy, water, trade effluent. Big thing on food reduction. We were doing some really good stuff with our involvement in RAT previously, but it brought that work and the kind of best practice and what we were doing in terms of monitoring and data capturing for food waste. into a lot of the other things that we're doing. And then we've got carbon reduction as well. And that's overseen by a steering group. And that was really important because it kind of guides the work of the work groups. We've taken the approach that we wanted passionate individuals within our business to be involved in these work groups. So it's all volunteers. Nobody's been co-opted or coerced onto these groups. So it's people with a real passion and a desire to make a change and a difference that are part of these groups. But within the steering group, we've got our managing director, we've got our senior leadership team, and we also have managing director of one of our sister organisations that harvest and process seaweed, so that we can, any of our learnings and best practice from this group can be rolled out across our sister organisations as well. And that's really important because we've then got responsibility and accountability at the very top of our business. We will launch the big initiatives, the big projects that are going to make a huge difference. But also we realise that there's investment to be made in this as well. We're going to require CapEx investment for some of the things that we want to do. So we're going to have that commitment and buy-in at the very top level of our business. And as I say, responsibility and accountability to make a change as well. One of the main things that we did do is we engaged a third-party consultancy to help us create a baseline carbon footprint. So we're capturing a whole raft of data, and we're doing lots of good things on managing our energy spend and whatnot, but we don't have a particular baseline. So from there, we don't really know what our footprint is. Therefore, how far away are we from net zero, and what's the route map that's going to get us there? So that work's ongoing now, and that will be completed by the end of Q1, which is going to be transformational within our business, and it's going to give us the clear direction of what we need to do and how we're going to get there by 2030. And then the big achievement we then had was we went zero waste to landfill last year. So yes, we are still waste to incineration. We do some anaerobic digestion, but as a Waitrose supplier, that was quite a big milestone for us, and a big tick in the box for our retail customer. Out of the plastics and recycling group, this is just a bit of a mantra that we've tried to kind of instill across our organisation, and it's a zero waste hierarchy. It'll be familiar to, I'm sure, a number of you in this session. But disposing of waste is the last resort. We've got a tiny bit of hazardous material that does go to landfill, but everything else, as I said, goes to incineration or anaerobic digestion. But that's the last resort. We're trying to prevent where possible, reduce, reuse, recycle and recover material wherever possible. So I wanted to share with you a couple of case study examples, just simple things, but simple things that have made a material difference in our business in 2021. And these aren't big initiatives that have come from our steering group or our work streams. These are suggestions and changes that have come from our factory floor. And a couple of our partners who are using the materials that we use every day and are seeing where waste exists and how we may do things better. So on the left there, on the very left there, but one of our production operatives, disposable aprons. We use a number of those a day. We are changing those at the start, at the end of shift, at tea breaks. So we use a huge amount of those single-use plastic items. So there was a suggestion, why don't we have reusable ones? So we trialed it just to make sure that there was kind of no cross-contamination or biological issues. But after a couple of weeks, we implemented it into the factory. That simple change has stopped 200 kilos of those single-use aprons going to landfill every single year. Small financial saving, however, it was quite a difference in terms of the material that's no longer going to waste to heat then, but was going to landfill at the start of last year. Then the example on the right is it's a noisy factory environment. We have to wear earplugs. Processing factories up and down the country will be using thousands, if not tens and hundreds of thousands of these every year. On the left-hand side there, you see our earplugs come in a small plastic casing. It was, again, one of our partners said, well, why are we having these things in such plastic, it just seems a waste. Is there nothing else we can do? So over the course of a month, we looked at an alternative. It had to be BRC compliant. It had to have the right noise cancelling levels. It had to be metal detectable, all those things. However, we found a solution, and that was that on the right. And that tiny change has stopped, again, 50 kilograms of plastic going to landfill every year. And in this example, it did have a material difference to the bottom line. You know, that alternative earplugs that we've taken in have cost the company considerably less money. So that's, you know, over £5,000 that we're saving due to that small change. And then in the next couple of years, we know we've got a lot of work to do on our journey towards net zero. And we've got some key commitments that we've made to our partners, to our customer, to our supply base, and our external stakeholders at large. So already mentioned, big piece of work we're doing is to create that carbon footprint by the end of the second quarter at the latest this year. And then that will help us develop our route map towards net zero. We do extensive work with RAP, and in 2018 we signed up to the food waste reduction route map to reduce our food waste by 50% by 2030. We actually achieved that in year one. However, we're trying to now reduce that by 10% each year. So the picture you see there on the right hand side is a fantastic on-croute product that we make in one of the ranges in Waitrose. The way the product's been designed is we actually waste some pastry as part of the process. We waste around about 6 tons of pastry every year by design. That's no longer acceptable. So there's a big piece of work ongoing at the moment to try and redesign that product and you know, reduce that pastry that just goes into anaerobic digestion at the moment. We've got a real conscious drive to improve our recycling. So whilst nothing is going into landfill anymore, we're only recycling about 20% of our waste. So the picture there is just a snapshot of some of the waste plastic trays that we've got on a weekly basis. So if we can make real inroads into that, that could save 16 tons of material going into waste to heat every year. To dispose of that alone is costing the business £5,000. So we hope to achieve that in the first half of this year. And we've also committed to producing our first annual report looking at our environmental and sustainability work. So it'll be the first of its kind for our business, and that should be produced in the spring of this year. On packaging, we spend a phenomenal amount of money on packaging, and we use a phenomenal amount of material. The image on the left there is fairly typical of our chill in Allness. We dispose of around about 250 tons of polystyrene through our supply chain. On the right is where we want to move to, and where we will move to in the next couple of years. We want to be polystyrene free within a couple of years. So that is our organic fish supply there on the right hand side, which we take in returnable plastic trays. So the fish comes in that, we wash them, and then it's returned. There's nothing being disposed of, and those have been in circulation for some years. It's a small part of our supply at the moment, but we want in the next couple of years is to move away from polystyrene entirely and move into returnable trays. And we also have a commitment that we're going to install electric charge points in the next 3 months. So our partners will have the ability to move over to electrical vehicles, and we will do no movement across our sites with anything other than electric vehicles, which will be a big step forward as well. And then finally, we use a phenomenal amount of single-use plastic and PPE. Picture there is some single-use plastics we use part of our hygiene process. So we're making inroads into changing that. We are constantly looking for new, more environmentally friendly materials, whether they be biodegradable or home compostable. We're looking at down-gauging materials, but some of the numbers are eye-watering on that slide. that pallet wrap alone, we use 1.25 million meters of pallet wrap. We stretch that on the road, it would be enough to take us to Brussels from Alness almost. It's phenomenal. Blue gloves, single-use liners, we're using in excess of 300,000 of those every year. So anything that we can do to down-gauge material, to use more environmentally friendly material, is going to make a big difference to our materials usage, what we're disposing of, and also the cost savings. So that was just a really brief whistle-stop tour in our journey into net zero so far, and where we're heading to as we approach 2030. Done some good work so far, but still a heck of a way to go. My contact details are there. Looking forward to any questions in the panel session at the end of this session. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you, David. Some really good real-life examples of how making quite small changes within the business can actually lead to really big impacts. Again, remember to pop any questions that you'd like to pose our panelists in the social chat. We'll jump on to our final speaker for this session to tell their story of building net zero and sustainability into their Highland business right from the start. So I will pass over to Amy Stammers.
Thanks very much, Helen. Afternoon, everyone. I've got some slides for us today to talk you through the journey that we've been on for net zero and my experience of that journey within the company, and most importantly, the footprinting process that we have been through to ultimately end up at our net zero position. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about how I did that, and also reflect on what that means for our business coming out the other end, and where we go from here, looking forward to 2030, 2040, and ultimately 2050, when the whole country has to be in a net zero position. So the first slide, if you wouldn't mind changing the slide, please. This gives you a little bit of an overview of our net zero journey. We were founded in 2015, and we were verified as net zero in 2021. It was never our plan, I guess, to hit net zero in 2021. But what we did want to do was to create a business and to build a distillery with minimum environmental impact. We wanted to decarbonise the manufacturing process that sits alongside distilling, and that's naturally very energy intensive. And the decarbonisation process is very similar to what we're talking about when we think about net zero, because it's all about removing carbon and reducing carbon from your operations or your supply chain. So we have experienced some significant challenges and also seen some significant opportunities from this net zero position. But our experience of this is going to be very different to somebody else's experience going through this process. No net two journeys essentially are going to be the same, because everyone's business operate in a slightly different way. But this is why footprinting is so important. It's something that David alluded to, is that unless you can see what your footprint is, you don't really understand where your emissions sit and how it's best to tackle them in order to get to net zero. In terms of what that means in a whiskey context, we have very high emissions for generating heat. You need a lot of heat to make whiskey. So the way the distillery was designed was around using biomass, and biomass is classified as a carbon neutral energy source. So we've achieved effectively a very large reduction in the amount of energy that we need, or the emissions, sorry, that we create from generating that heat to make whiskey. So the bar on the right in that graph is what our emissions would look like if we were using oil or gas or a traditional kind of fossil fuel feedstock to generate heat. And then on the left is what the green bar is what our emissions are currently in 2020 on site for our generation of heat, because we buy green electricity off the grid and we use a biomass. The blue section of that graph are the emissions that are captured in our supply chain so far our journey. So there's still a significant amount of those which we have to still address. But the big thing is that we've managed to do it for ourselves on site. So the next slide gives you a couple of tips, things that I could think about that I thought might be useful, because I was employed at Nc'nean as a visitor manager. My job was never to look at our carbon footprint, but the pandemic happened in 2019 and I didn't have any visitors to manage. So I turned my attention to footprinting because I'm interested in environmental matters. And for us, it was very much the decision to do it in-house, and for me to take on that role was very much a matter of time versus money. So we got various quotes of different companies, consulting companies, to do this process for us, and the sums of money were much more than we could afford to lay out that year or in subsequent years. But what we did have on our side was time, because I didn't have any visitors. So I decided that, yeah, I could give this a go. What it does require people to do is have the will to read a lot. There is a lot of information out there, there's a lot of things to get your head around, but I think what our journey shows people is that it is actually possible to do it yourself if you need to. It's quicker obviously to get someone else to do it, but there's still a lot of data that you need to pull out of your business and give to a consultancy firm in order for them to do that. So it's really something you have to judge for yourself, but it is absolutely possible. And it's a really good process to go through, because it really makes you understand where the things are in your business, and it makes you very involved in that process. Alongside that, it is quite daunting, but it doesn't have to be a huge complex thing. You can make it as simple as you want to make it, and you can expand your footprint over time. But the key thing is if you're choosing what you do and don't put in your footprint, it's to be transparent about that, because your consumers are going to need to see exactly what you're talking about when you talk about your carbon footprint. And how you determine what goes into your carbon footprint is really about what's important for your business, because as I said, no two businesses are the same, so you need to think about that, and I'll come on to that in a minute. The last thing is verification. So we've done this ourselves. We've designed and calculated our carbon footprint, but we still need somebody to look at that who is qualified to say, yes, we agree with what your calculations are, and this is actually your carbon footprint. This then gets you out of any sticky situations that you might arise in from people saying that you're greenwashing, or that your carbon footprint isn't correct. So I would say that having your footprint verified, if you're going to do it yourself, is absolutely it's really important. That does cost money, but it certainly doesn't cost as much as having someone else do your entire footprint for you. So it's a cost saving. So in the next slide is an overview of what your carbon footprint looks like if you step back from it. And it's very helpful for you, if you're going to decide to do this yourself, to think about all of the inputs that go into your business, all the way from your starting point to your end point. So this is everything that goes into the things that you make, or the operation that you have, and the things that come out of your business and go to the end consumer, and also what your consumer does with it, and where that product ends up, whether it can be recycled or whether it goes to landfill, etc. So there's a lot of things to think about, but generally these parts of your footprint will fall into two categories. Either they come under what's classified as your emissions, so these are the things that you are directly responsible for, or they are in your supply chain. And that's when you report in your carbon footprint, these are the two things that will come out of that process. When you are looking at this, if you look at this, it's very important, as I mentioned, to identify what is in and out of the scope of your footprint. But the minimum that you need to do as a company is to look at your emissions. So this is your energy use, your electricity, your fuel use on site at your operation in your business. Outside of that, the reporting is voluntary. So you can choose to capture your supplier emissions or your distribution emissions, or you can say, do you know what, this year I'm just going to do our emissions, and then next year, once I'm a bit more familiar with the process, we're going to look at our upstream suppliers or our downstream distribution. For us at Nc'nean, we've done our emissions, and we've captured our upstream supplier emissions, and then next year's reporting, we're going to start to bring in our downstream distribution That's a business choice for us because last year, when we were calculating this, we didn't really have any downstream distribution, so it didn't seem worthwhile to do that. We needed data, which we didn't have essentially. So anyway, to help you get your head around this, there is a huge information out there, which David Thomson was referring to as well. But we used a website, a protocol, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It's basically international guidance on carbon footprinting and standards and what you need to do and what you need to display when you do this process. So that's a very good tool to look at if you want to get your head around this. There are also industry toolkits. There's essentially software out there that people have made and designed for industries or businesses where there's a format and you can input data into it and it will churn out a figure for you and say that this is your carbon footprint. They weren't relevant for us because our business was a bit more nuanced than that, and we needed to take into account the fact that we're organic, and organic footprint wasn't really accounted for, couldn't be accounted for within these business toolkits. So yeah, and alongside that, there's also a lot of government's guidance. So basically, there's a lot of reading to do, but it should hopefully make things clearer for you once you do that. The next slide is how I physically calculated it. And this is getting into the kind of nitty gritty, but I think it's important for people to see that actually it's not that complicated, especially if you're looking just at your on-site emissions, your physical business emissions. So first you establish your footprint boundary, which we just talked about, what is and is not going to be calculated or looked at. Then you need data, which is something that David referred to, David Chapman. There's a lot of it. And what is relevant to your business is very important here. And then you need to take that data, i.e. how much of something it is you use, and you need to convert it into carbon. And there is a very, very useful spreadsheet, which is made by the UK government. It's called UK Government Conversion Factors for Company Reporting. This Excel has a huge amount of data, which tells you how much, if you produce a kilowatt hours worth of energy, what that means in terms of emissions. So basically you look at this spreadsheet and you go, right, well, we have biomass. These are two examples from our actual carbon footprint. We have biomass energy. We make 888,000 kilowatt hours of energy a year. And that spreadsheet will tell me what the value is for every kilowatt hour of energy that we produce in carbon. So I can then times by one, by the other, and I have my carbon footprint for how much biomass we burn on site. Same for electricity, although electricity, interestingly, is zero because we buy green from the grid, but we have to verify with our supplier that it is actually a zero carbon source of electricity. So the other thing to mention here is that although the government conversion factors is a brilliant piece of kit, and I would absolutely recommend anyone to look at it who's thinking about doing this, because it will make things a lot clearer. There are some things in there that they can't provide conversion for. So, for example, in our industry, we use a lot of yeast. You can't make alcohol without yeast, but yeast isn't in these conversion factors. So we have to then find other data from within the industry, i.e. the industry that makes yeast, or from our supplier on what the carbon footprint is for that yeast. So there is some digging you have to do where there is data missing, but again, it's quite a useful, interesting process to go through. So yeah, that in a nutshell, that is how to calculate your carbon footprint. The last slide, I can't remember if there is a last slide or not, actually. Yes, so this is the kind of things that came out of our process for us. We were able to see, once we'd included all of our suppliers and all of the transport that it takes us to get everything to site, what our on-site emissions are. It was very easy for us to see where we need to make carbon reductions and which suppliers we need to work with specifically to make the biggest reductions to get to net zero across our supply chain. That is very useful, and it also helps you have informed conversations with those suppliers about that journey for them. As already been mentioned, there's also cost savings. So where you make carbon savings, there are also energy efficiencies, yeah, that works out financially very good in some ways, but in other ways it could cost you money. That's something that you can look at within the context of your business. best foot forward. So in achieving net zero for our on-site emissions, it was a really, really positive marketing piece for us. We didn't know what the response would be, but we had a huge amount of interest in the distillery over the summer. A lot of press coming to see our production and speak to us about our journey. So that's been great. It's been great for sales. It's been great for exposure, actually. And then, of course, you get to report all of these wonderful things to your consumers, and that gives your consumers confidence, and again, helps sell the products that you are making, if that's what you do. And transparency as well. Consumers love the transparency behind this, and they like to be able to see what you're doing and the fact that it's not greenwashing. So the cons are that it is administratively burdensome in the outset. You need to design a system and a way of recording lots of data, and again doing those calculations, but once you've done it, you can replicate that quite easily year on year, but you need to have somebody who's willing to do it. And then there is the cost of having it verified, but as I mentioned, that's less than having someone do it for you every year. And then the last thing is that in some instances where you're looking at decarbonising, when you're looking at the decarbonisation of heat particularly, it can be quite costly because there's new tech that you will need to get away from fossil fuels, and that's quite expensive. So our biomass boiler was 4 times more expensive than a standard oil boiler. That was an offset that we had to make at the beginning, to say, right, this is going to cost us more, but in the long term, it's going to save us a lot more. So again, that is something to consider. But that is a very brief overview. I've probably overrun my 10 minutes, so I am sorry. But if you want any more information, there is stuff on our website. You can have a look at our sustainability report and all the things that we did alongside that.
Thank you, Amy. That was really interesting. And we have gone over time, so we've got 3 or 4 minutes left for some questions. But I'm sure the audience will agree that it was worthwhile running over for the content in those presentations. And as I said earlier, all the slides from the conference will be sent out in the conference delegate packs as well. There's some really useful links and top tips and case studies in there, so I'm sure you'll be having a look through the slides. So I'll jump in with a question to begin with. It's probably quite a useful question to ask each of you before we close off. So what one top tip would you give to a business looking to begin their own net zero journey? And we'll start with you, David Chapman, and then if you could give a quick answer, and then we'll try and get a thought from each of the panelists.
Pretty simple. It's don't put it off, just start. You know, you're a 30-year-old business, and it's only last year that we actually kind of got our act together and coordinated our efforts. There was always a reason to put it off, always a reason that, yeah, net zero in 2030, we've got ages. You know, it's a long journey, but if you don't start, then you'll never get there. So yeah, don't put it off, because it's, yeah, whether it's government taxation or, you know, whatever reason, you know, I think that it's just going to be more and more imposed on us. And as I say, customers and, you know, future employees are expecting it of businesses. So yeah, don't put it off, start the journey, however small those steps are.
Thanks, David. And related to sort of a top tip, David Thomson, could you recommend any training for companies looking to get more information on net zero and to begin that journey?
Yeah, I think the thing that I was going to say about the top tip is don't suffer alone as well. I think more and more there is advice and guidance from a range of organisations. People like Keep Scotland Beautiful, for example, will do you know, awareness raising about net zero, and there's a whole range of other things that are going on. Opportunity North East have a pilot officer in place that's supporting people in Aberdeenshire and otherwise about starting this journey. And also make sure, I think, that you are taking advantage of the resources that are available from Zero Waste Scotland, from ourselves, from Scotland Food and Drink, and actually raising the issues that you're encountering as well. So if you are having problems, talk to your membership organisation, talk to us all about it, and then we can help and try pointing in the right direction of training, pointing in the right direction of resources, pointing in the right direction of advice. So my point is really learn as much about this, but don't suffer alone as well.
Very good tip. And then finally, Amy, if you could provide one top tip before we close off the session, that would be really useful. And apologies to everyone if we've not got to your questions. We'll find a way through the social app to make sure that we respond to all the questions that have been posed to the panelists, and we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I think my top tip would be, I think similar to what David Thomson was saying, like just ask for advice, ask for guidance, speak to people who have done it, ask questions, Google, like just it can seem quite difficult, but actually the information is all there. So, and people can help you break it down and work it out. So it's not, doing a carbon footprint or asking someone to do a carbon footprint for you doesn't have to be a struggle.
Excellent, thank you. And time is flowing, so we're going to have to shortly draw our net zero session to a close. So thank you for all the questions to our panelists. And I'm sure they are just the beginning or the continuation of really important conversations between organisations as we work towards net zero goals. It's almost time to hand back to the conference host, Elaine Jameson from HIE, for the 5-minute wrap-up session. But before we leave this session, I've got the results in from the poll. So we asked, does net zero add value to your business or is it a threat? So 66.7% said it adds value and 33.3% said it is a threat. I think that's a really promising result, and hopefully the conversation today will inspire some future planning and some action, and maybe remove some of those perceived sort of threats that the overall net zero goal can pose companies as well. As David Thomson said, there's loads of support out there, so please don't see it as a threat. There's opportunities in there too, so reach out and have a conversation if you're struggling on your net zero journey. And a huge thanks to our panelists for their contributions today. Some great content in there, and we'll share the slides next week, and we will see you in the conference conclusion session in a second. Thank you for joining us.